Hello everyone, today I am making World of Warships 1 through 50 scale Sovetский Soyuz. The first step of this model is I go onto World of Warships ship tool and I find the specific model, in this case the Sovetский Soyuz, where I find her length. In this case, it is 270 meters. With this data, I then divide by 350 and then multiply by 100 and I get the centimeter length for the model. Next, I cut the turrets on a glow forge. Designed on shape, I scale the drawings and then cut them. There, in the holes on the barbettes, allow the magnets to be put in and the turrets to freely rotate. The superstructure is likewise done in a similar fashion, scaled and then cut out on the glow forge. These pieces allow the build to be much more detailed and to be cut out much faster. Once the parts have all been cut out, I then glue them together and then prepare and then paint them. I have cut the superstructure out first this time because as the school year is about to end, I won't be able to cut these out during summer break. So I have to get ahead and just finish these while in the final few days of the spring semester. On Sketchfab, I use a 3D model of Sovetsky Soyuz in order to better scale my build and make sure everything is in the correct spaces. Apart from this, I don't use any other guides or instructions to make my models. I continue on to make the superstructure. I use super glue bottle caps in order to make the funnels and use small plastic dowels in order to make the masts. Then I stack all the superstructure pieces on each other to make the different floors and then paint the floors orange. The secondary battery is likewise still designed and cut out. This will come in later though. Then I have the basic hull shape. I've traced it out on cardboard with my ruler and Sharpie, and I put the superstructure there onto scale to see how it looks, and it looks pretty nice, so I continue on with it. Okay, now I start to cut the hull out. My knife is a little bit dull right now, so it does take a little bit more effort, and this cardboard is a bit tougher on the thickness. So, I'll talk a bit more about the history behind the Sovetsky Soyuz-class. So, the Sovetsky Soyuz-class, or the Stalin's Republics-class, were a class of Soviet battleships built in the late 1930s, or at least they were planned to be built in the late 1930s. Because of Soviet industry and the invasion of the Soviet Union by the Germans, these ships weren't completed. Originally, they were going to be 15 planned. However, it wasn't long before 11 of them were cancelled and only 4 retained. The 4 retained were Sovetsky Soyuz, which is the lead ship, Sovetsky Ukraina, or Soviet Ukraine, Sovetsky Belaruskaya, Soviet Belarus, and Sovetsky Rossiya, Soviet Russia. However, these ships were all plagued with issues while they were being built. For one, Sovetsky Rossiya used the wrong rivets and had to be cancelled, and progression in construction aboard these ships were relatively slow. Here, the hull pieces have been cut out and are ready to be glued together. Now, with the cut out pieces, I use hot glue and 2 centimeter strips in order to create the hull. I usually use laser cut elements for my ships. However, because this ship is large enough and I cannot fit this on the glow forge at my school, I still have to cardboard cut it out. Okay, going back to the Sovetsky Soyuz-class. The Sovetsky Soyuz-class, they were armed with 9 16-inch 406mm naval guns in 3 triple turrets in the exact same layout as an Iowa-class battleship. As a matter of fact, the Sovetsky Soyuz were designed to counter the foreign naval battleships, including the Bismarcks of Germany, the Yamato-class battleships of Imperial Japan, and the Iowa-class battleships of the United States Navy. Their armor would have been an impressive 400 millimeters on the belt. However, because of the limits within Soviet metallurgy, their armor was more of late 19th century metal grades instead of the modern Class A type armor used within the US Navy's battleships. As a result, despite the very impressive thickness of 400 millimeters, in actuality, their armor performed much more like 250 millimeters if compared to proper battleship armor. This was due to the fact that their industry, the Soviet industry, was just not as well prepared to create large plates, especially of that thickness, after the Communist Revolution. Here, I continue the construction of the bow and the bottom part of the hull, where I will install the propellers and the rudders. One interesting thing to note with the Sovetsky Soyuz-class is their use of triple propellers, something that was seen on the German battleships. Triple propellers aren't always the best because of the stresses they put on the keel, and they're not as good redundancy in case one of the rudders fail. That was seen with the Bismarck when it was just running in circles after it got hit by a torpedo from a swordfish. Even more interesting thing about the Sovetsky Soyuz is the center propeller just sticks out. There's no rudder behind it. So on the blueprints, the center propeller is just like sitting there, and it looks kind of goofy if I'm honest. So now I glued the pieces on, which are the propeller guards, and they are made from popsicle sticks. Then, once that's done, I install the actual shafts, or the little rods on there. And then along the way, I do strengthen the hull a little bit more, as it proved a little bit too weak on the first time around. So here the wooden dowels come in, and I make holes on the side in order to make sure that they can stick all the way in, and those at the ends is where the propellers are going to be stuck on. So once that's all done, then the propellers, I test fit the propellers on there. I make a hole for the center propeller just to make sure it can get in there. And then I add little bracing pieces on the side to make sure it looks flush relatively with the hull. Then I start to do the rudders. The rudders are relatively easy to do. Twin rudders, and they have the thin popsicle sticks wrapped over them in order to make them give it a more flush look, and to also give it a bit more strength and not just have bare cardboard sticking out there. So this is the finished hull. It has the 3 layers that's seen with all my battleships, and those are the propellers in the back. Here are the catapults that are finished. Then I have painted the hull with the classic Soviet blue, the white boot stripe, and the lower red hull. This is the B turret barbette with the orange decking. This is the forward breakwaters with a magnet for the turret. This is the forward turrets having been installed. Note the little boat on there. This is the secondary battery that has been installed. Here you can see I'm installing these small little decking pieces. It's relatively simple. I get a popsicle stick, I cut into many little pieces, and then I use glue, and then I stick it on there. So in order to make it fit, I use my knife, and then I jam it onto there, and then I'm able to stick it back on, which is pretty nice. Here are the little lifeboats that I printed out and then put on cardstock. Here's the next to the cardstock, and here's the completed model. After putting the little pieces on there, they are like the little life rafts for the guys. The turrets can rotate, which is pretty cool, and it's really detailed, as I think I've also painted the little artillery, the gun socks on the little 6-inch guns. And this is it. So this concludes my video. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe and share with your friends.